Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to Learning Rabbit. In this lecture, we are going to actually write a Docker Compose file for the backend that we had earlier and the MySQL database. It's going to be really simple, really easy to grab, and you will understand how to create a Docker Compose file from scratch for any services that you have. And by the way, if you have not seen the introduction to Docker Compose yet, I would say that you watch that out. The link would be here in this video. So we made a hashtag monitor in a few lectures from now, and we want to create a Docker Compose for that so that we get easy automation using Docker Compose. We get all the things automated like the volumes, environment variables, networks, and even the port forwarding. So let's see how it's going to map out in a Docker Compose file. So we'll have two containers, MySQL DB, hashtag MySQL, which was the REST backend. One volume for the MySQL, one common network for both of them so that they can communicate with each other. We'll have some environment variables that we are using in our application, and these two variables are used for the MySQL database. We'll also have some Docker images. That Docker images is going to be a simple Docker image for MySQL. And we are going to build an image from scratch for the REST backend since we have it in our code base. This is how it's going to look like finally, and I'm going to walk you through all the steps, all the little components of this Docker Compose file. So stay tuned. Let me shift back to my editor and make you guys walk through each of these components so it becomes really easy for you to make a Docker Compose on your own for your own projects. So let's jump back to the editor and start coding. So before we start coding, let me show you all the environment variables that we will need for this application. So this first part denotes all the environment variables that are required as part of my front end, or so these are the environment variables that are required for this application. And the first section represents all the environment variables that are required for my backend, and these two are required for the MySQL database. So if I jump back to my code and show you the app.py that we created, we have the root password environment variable, we have db host, db port, and db name. One more that I have declared is the REST port, so that the port also can be configurable on this Docker image. So that is why I've kept all these variables inside this .env file, which we are going to use inside the Docker Compose. And now let's start writing the code for Docker Compose file and use all these environment variables there. Now let's start creating the Docker Compose file with all the environment variables that we created just now. The first part is to write the version for the Docker Compose file. This is going to be 3.7. If you want to do the latest, you can do that as well. Just change the number. Services will have all the containers that you want to get up. The first one is the REST API, and that we are going to build from the Docker file. So I'm going to use the build. Then we have to use the ports, which are the REST port that we have for the backend. So this is how we do the port forwarding in Docker Compose. We need to have the restart policy. It will be on failure because when the REST API fails, because the database is not up, it should restart itself and connect it again. Now the networks, let's refer to the hashtag net. This is going to be the network. Our REST backend will depend on, for example, the MySQL container. We'll create that just now, but I'm just referring that right now. And we'll also have an env file, which is .env, so that it imports all the environment variables from it. Now create the MySQL service, which will be MySQL. Let's give a container name for it, which will be MySQL_db. I'm giving this so that we can use the name and not the IP address. since we do not have any uh, Docker file for building MySQL, I'm just going to use the image directly, just like we do it on the command line. So this was the version, and the command is, I'm just going to copy the command that we used to fire with MySQL, like this. Then we have volumes. Since the MySQL database has to be stored somewhere, so I'm going to use a volume. That also I'm going to create later down. But let's name it MySQL storage, and we have to mount that in where lib MySQL. So this is where MySQL saves its data, and we are going to mount that to our named volume called MySQL storage. Networks, again, it's the same network, so that both of these containers can talk to each other. It's the same network, hashtag net. The env file, again, .env. And now let's declare the volumes that we have been using above. So this is how we declare the volumes. I've showed that in the previous lecture as well. If you have not seen that lecture, I'm going to share the link here as well as in the YouTube's description. Make sure you watch that video so you know how a compose file looks like. And the networks, since we have used the hashtag net, so this is how we're going to use that. Let's see if everything is in place, and then we can just start running our application. So we have our version, we have our services, then we have our restarts, networks, and env files. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now let's go to the terminal and run this. Compose up, and if you want to build your image again, you can use the minus minus build. If you want to recreate the containers, so Docker Compose has this facility that when the containers are already created, it does not creates them again, it just runs them. So if you want to recreate them, you can use minus minus force recreate. I hope you have been able to read this. It is Docker Compose up minus minus build minus minus force create. So okay, it says network mapping must be a mapping, not a string. Okay, so this one, I guess this should have this so that it becomes a mapping. So when we run this, you saw that it is creating these networks. It actually appends the project name before the volumes and the networks. So that is why you see hashtag minus monitor underscore, and then it appends the name that you have given to your storage and to your volume, to your network, sorry, and to your volume. So it actually is appending the directory name before that. So if you go to your volume ls or network ls, you'll see all these things. So you saw that here the in the blue, the MySQL was starting, but and suddenly the REST API started coming up. So obviously when the REST came up and the database is not up, it's bound to failure. You see that these are all the REST API failure in the yellow. And again, MySQL DB came up. Here you saw the MySQL DB came up. And in the green, the color changed because the REST API was restarted. Here the MySQL was up and running. You see the color changing. Every color change means that there is some other container, and by other container I mean uh, whenever the failure happened, the REST API was restarted, and ultimately it finally came up because MySQL was up at this point. So after that, finally our REST service came up. Before that, it was just restarting itself, just to make or trying to make a connection with the database. You can actually have retries in your own Python logic as well, but I did not go into that depths. You can do that yourself. You can have retries in SQL Alchemy as well. so that it does not kill the application. It just it keeps on retrying that. But this was just to show you that even if you don't have that retry mechanism in your logic, in your backend logic, Docker Compose tries to restart your service as well. So now that the REST API is able to contact with the database, let's go to the browser and see if we can query this service again. So I already have this. So let me search for earthquake. The service is running. Soon you'll see the response change. You see that the response changed. The hashtag did not match, so we have a match is false. If we go back to the terminal, log into our MySQL database, use the Twitter database, the tweets table, if we search on that, we see that our query has been inserted, right? Let's search another query. I'm going to search earthquakes are here. So when I search for this, you see it is again false. Let's go back to the terminal, search this table again. You see we have another query inside this table. So everything is working fine. Now I'm going to exit the MySQL, go back to our code. In the code, let's stop the application. You just do a Control-C and it will start stopping all the services. If you do a Control-C again, it will force kill them. So it's almost done. Now I have done everything and I'm just restarting my whole app again. So when I do this, I'm expecting that my data is actually saved because I'm using volumes, right? So now the database is up, the backend is up. You see in the yellow, you see in the blue, the database is up. Let's go back to the terminal again and look in the database by logging in, using the Twitter database, searching the tweets, and you have it. The data is persisting. So the volumes are up. We are able to communicate from one container to the other just by using the name. We are not using the IP address ourselves. Docker is actually using the service discovery and finding the IP address just by the container name. So we have used MySQL DB as the container name. See this? We're just using the container name MySQL DB, and even in our environment file, we are using the host as MySQL DB, and this is getting translated to the IP address automatically by the service discovery that Docker provides us when we use the bridge network. I have explained that in the previous videos, in the network videos. Go and just check it out. If you have any doubts, use the YouTube's comment section. Anyways, so our full stack application is completed. So everything is up and running here. Now is the time to finalize this. I hope you have understood how Docker Compose works and how it manages to give us the comfort of using the automation for building Docker. This brings us to the end of the lecture. Now that we have understood how Docker Compose works, I think we are all ready to bootstrap our application using Docker Compose. And we can utilize all the automation that it gives us. We can build, we can create containers, we can attach networks, create volumes on the fly, we can have environment variables injected into it, and whatnot. Docker Compose is one way to get it all. I would recommend that you study it again, watch this video again if you like, and just make your own applications and convert them into your Docker Compose. Try writing Docker Compose 1 or 2 times and you'll get the hang of it. With that, I end my case here. I hope you learned a lot throughout this course. I will have one last session for Docker in which I'll discuss some of the caveats of Docker, some of the things that did not make into those videos, and I'll have an FAQ session after that in which I'll go live and you guys can ask me any question you like regarding Docker, and I'll try my best to answer all of them. Thanks, stay at home, keep learning. Bye bye from Learning Rabbit.